Hi, my name is Lori Groh, and I'm here with Deva Murphy. And today we're going to be talking about eating disorders, and very excited to learn more about what you do in your practice and to hear more about how somebody knows if they might need to come and see you. So, Deva, why don't you tell me, let's just go right into it, and you can tell me a little bit about what eating disorders are.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me. I
Yeah.
feel very passionate about the topic of eating disorders because I think it's just an ever-growing struggle with many people. And I think
Mhm.
there are types of, diagnoses that I think have a lot of a stigma attached to them. So with eating disorders, I guess I'll just kind of give like a high level overview. There is not just one type of an eating disorder. There are multiple types of eating disorders. And when you funnel them all down, essentially what it is just a really unhealthy relationship with food, body image, weight, and oftentimes exercise. And so,
Yeah.
you know, how I would kind of categorize them is the main types of eating disorder behaviors are restriction,
Mhm.
binge eating, and purging. And with purging comes kind of self-induced vomiting or over-exercising. And that
Right.
purging oftentimes is a way to compensate for what somebody has eaten. And oftentimes it's their brain, that eating disorder has told them it's too much, so you need to compensate and do something to take care of that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
sort of like almost like an equalizer, trying to get things to be
Absolutely.
equal. Yeah,
hmm Yep.
yeah.
And so I would say that the common eating disorders that I think an average person might have heard is anorexia, and that is
Mhm.
really characterized by restriction. And I think there's this common thought that a person can only have anorexia if they're of a very low weight, and that really
Mhm.
isn't true anymore. Somebody who
Mm.
might have had a higher weight on a scale can still struggle with anorexia because the
Right.
main symptom of that diagnosis is just a significant level of restriction. So
Mm.
we have
Yeah, that's a good
anorexia.
thing to know, yeah, to
hmm
recognize, notice that it doesn't always have to be what we think it looks like. Yeah.
Absolutely. hmm And I
Mhm.
think oftentimes, if a person does struggle with that significant level of restriction and they do meet criteria for anorexia, they oftentimes might not seek treatment because in their brain they think, oh, well, my weight isn't low enough. My weight is normal, or it actually might be, above what I want it to be.
Right,
So,
right.
anorexia would probably be one of those bubbles. A second bubble for an eating disorder would be binge eating disorder. And
Mhm.
I would say, probably over the past few years in my practice, binge eating disorder is probably the most common eating disorder that I see. And with that,
Yeah.
it's categorized by that overeating, and then it moves into that extreme amounts of food, which I would categorize as those binge eating episodes.
Yeah, yeah. So
hmm
with that, I mean, maybe it's not something known, but do you have any
hmm
thoughts on why maybe that's happening a little bit more now, or that's what you're seeing more? Any thoughts on that?
I would just say, I think oftentimes with our culture too,
Mhm.
and what we see in the media, what's available to us in grocery stores, that can sometimes play a part in it. But a lot of why binge eating happens is it stems from that, well, I need to lose weight, or, I just need to
Yeah.
eat less. Or I'm, X amount of pounds overweight. And so
Mhm.
people have these intentions of trying to eat less to lose weight. And then what happens is they're hungry, and their
Right.
bodies start to give them signals, like these, waves of saying, I need more food, I need to eat.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so then it turns into, when there is access to food, people tend to overeat, or then it is becomes that binge eating where it's just this large quantity of food that oftentimes can make a person feel really, really sick.
Right, right. And the restricting portion of that, right, probably too does
hmm
something with the stomach And
It
so then it's
does.
tighter as well. I would
Mhm.
imagine that it would impact you a lot more physically with that
Absolutely.
cycle. Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. So we have anorexia, we have binge eating
Yeah.
disorder. Another really common eating disorder is bulimia.
Mm.
And bulimia is kind of categorized very basically as overeating component is there, or sometimes the binge eating component. But then the bulimia part of it is somebody engages in purging
Mhm.
oftentimes, where there's this self-induced vomiting to, again, like you
Mhm.
said, kind of compensate for
Yeah.
what somebody ate. Um,
Mhm.
and there's a newer eating disorder that I'm seeing a lot more, and it's called orthorexia. So that might not be a term that I think
Mhm.
oftentimes is heard very much by people, but orthorexia is just this obsession with healthy, clean. Oftentimes for people, it might be, I only eat organic foods or I don't eat
Mhm.
processed foods. And it just becomes this obsession that takes over their life and their eating habits, where they limit themselves pretty severely as to
Mhm.
what types of foods they can eat.
Yeah, it sounds like a restriction
Hmm.
is happening there. It just looks a little different in
It
practice again.
does.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
And again, that kind of comes into play with diet culture, where in our diet culture, we hear, oh, carbs are bad for you, or, don't eat processed sugar. And so
Right,
when we hear these messages from all different aspects in our lives, of course, it's so understandable to just get caught up in that and truly
right.
believe that there's good food and there's bad food. And I can't
Yeah.
eat those bad foods.
Yeah, yeah, that idea makes a lot of sense. And
Hmm.
that is that pressure, I think, that we're all
It
feeling to
is.
sort of just eat better,
Hmm.
eat clean, all of that. And
Yep.
ideally, yes, right? But then it becomes more of
Hmm.
when you said like it kind of takes over is
Yep.
when it starts to become an issue because then you plan like maybe your day around that or your life around that,
Hmm. Yep.
and then
Yep.
limits you in maybe social interactions or
Yeah,
that sort
it's
of
a
thing. Yeah.
really good point. And I
Yeah.
think that, that can sometimes be a really clear indicator that somebody might need to come see me,
Mhm.
or get some help when those, what I call them food rules, they take over a person's life and they stop doing social things that involve getting together and eating with friends or family
Mhm.
members. Or, whenever they eat a meal, they have to carve out time after that to engage in a behavior or engage in exercising to compensate for
Mhm.
that. So
Mhm.
it really can take over a person's life.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and probably leaves that feeling of isolation too with that, right?
Mhm.
Of I have to then do this, so I need to step away, from my people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
oftentimes, when a person is restricting, there's actually brain chemicals that are altered in their brain up there that
Mhm.
those levels can reduce, which oftentimes can lead to a mood disorder, something like depression.
Mhm.
And so, eating disorders, depression, anxiety, those go so hand in hand a lot of the time,
Yeah.
because what's so scary with eating disorders is it's not just an emotional component, there's a physical component that really can impact how your brain operates.
Right, right. That makes a
Mhm.
lot of sense. So, Deva, tell me a little bit about how you help someone that's coming in for an eating disorder and needs some
Yeah.
assistance. What are some ways you help?
Absolutely. So I think the biggest thing that I would do in the beginning is to just educate. Help them be able to understand, what their eating disorder looks like, what behaviors make up
Mhm.
what they engage in, and just really start to educate, like, what are those behaviors? What is the eating disorder doing to you?
Yeah.
Oftentimes an eating disorder comes into play for somebody because they're not getting something, where they might not feel like they have control in their life, or
Mhm.
they might not feel like they can ever let loose or let go. And so that eating disorder starts to serve that purpose for them. So
Mm,
education is a huge component of what I would do in the beginning, and helping them then to really start to look at it as, well, what is this eating disorder doing to me? What are the
right.
consequences that start to come up when I listen to that voice in my head that says, I can't eat sweets, or I have to limit myself to X number of calories each day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah. So
then,
what the purpose is, like there's part of it that's what's the purpose, what's it doing, and then
yeah.
what are some of the
Mhm.
consequences? Yeah.
Yeah. But oftentimes for people, what I hear from my clients is the eating disorder is the only thing that I have in my life that makes me feel good, or it gives me a sense
Mhm.
of control, or I feel powerful, I feel capable. And although I need to validate those
Yeah.
things, it's kind of a skewed concept of what having power and control is in your life. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
really helping them, I think, to just start to shift some of those thinking patterns, and using CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is a huge part of what I do, but it's really just kind of like streamlined and focused on the eating disorder.
Yeah, and I could see too, like how it could be that reward built in as well with the
Mhm.
restriction of I'm
Yep.
achieving something here,
Yeah,
right? And
absolutely.
it can be a reward.
Mhm.
Makes sense though. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say the other big component, if a client were to come to me and we do start to kind of go delve into the eating disorder treatment, more often than not, I am recommending somebody get connected with an eating disorder specific dietitian.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is dietitians that are truly educated, they have knowledge working with eating disorders, because it's a different approach than, like a diabetic dietitian. And
right.
that's
Right.
something that I have referrals, I have connections. That's something that I would really help facilitate, just to re-educate
Mhm.
somebody on what their eating habits need to look like for themselves, and work to let
Yeah.
go of comparing, well, my mom eats like this, or my friend eats like this, or that actress that I see on TV eats like this.
Mhm.
Really
Mhm.
focusing on what they need for their own nutrition.
Yeah, that seems key. Yeah, that
Hmm.
education piece. And I think it takes this other part out, which is maybe some
Hmm.
confusion that can occur. And having like
Absolutely.
straightforward information can
Yep.
really be helpful. So that's
Hmm.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so
Mhm.
I would say between, finding somebody like me, a therapist who specializes in eating disorders, as well as an
Mhm.
eating disorder dietitian, those are two really big components with that. And oftentimes working with my client's primary care physician is a huge part of that too. Just making sure that the medical piece is stable.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds great though. Like having that
Hmm.
coordination of people, which
Yep, it's really
I think we
important.
all need that, right?
Absolutely.
Like these extra
Yes.
supports and people talking to each other, all be on the same page. It just makes change a lot easier in general if our environment is
Absolutely.
shifting and supporting that. Yes, that's really
Hmm.
cool.
I
So
I
Deva,
wholeheartedly
yeah.
agree.
And so as far as like the recovery process and what that looks
Mhm.
like, is there anything else you want to share about that part?
Yes, I would say that the biggest thing that I teach my clients is that it is, how I explain it is, eating disorder recovery is like a sawtooth pattern, where it's not this straight trajectory
Mhm.
forward. You have some wins, and then you might have some struggles where you feel like you kind of take, 3 steps forward,
Yeah.
2 steps back. And it's all about progress, not perfection.
Yeah.
Where people can get really down on themselves when, after a few weeks go by and they haven't engaged in those eating disorder behaviors, and all of a sudden some stressor comes in their life and they restrict, or they binge, or they purge. There's a lot of guilt and shame attached to that. So I think the biggest piece then too is knowing that you don't have to be perfect. Those behaviors are going to come back around every so often. It's just, what can you learn from that? How else can you cope with whatever that trigger was in your life, instead of resorting to the eating disorder behavior?
Yeah, yeah, and that those things that occur, right, feel like setbacks, but
Hmm.
really
Yeah,
it's all gonna help. It's all gonna
it
help
is.
us in the progression whenever we're trying to
Absolutely.
make a change, right? Yeah,
That's a very good point. Yep.
yeah,
So I would say that's the biggest piece. And oftentimes recovery can take a lot of time.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, because you're right, like that process piece. Like we
Yep.
didn't just start walking. I like to think about it that way. We just didn't one day
Yeah.
start walking.
Yeah.
It took a lot of encouragement, oh,
Mhm.
you're pulling yourself up. Good job, right?
Yeah.
And not to infantile it, but that there is that idea within us that anytime we're trying to move towards something, that there's going to be the fallbacks. There's going to be that feeling of, oops, now I know I have to step up. Now I know I have to do this. I can do this differently. Talk to people that are, in the same place as me, trying to work through it can be another really great thing. Yeah.
Yep.
So Deva, is there anything else you want to mention or talk about before we end today? Anything I might have missed?
No, I mean, I would say, if you are someone out there that has kind of connected to any of the things that I've said today, please reach out to me, and I would be happy to just do a free 20-minute consult with you if you're just kind of looking for just some sort of information or advice or a place to start. So reach out and I will be happy to help. And if I can't help, I will be happy to get you connected with any resources that I might have.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Deva. And if anyone wants to reach out, our phone number, your phone number is on our, it's going to be on the comments, but also you can look at our website, shoresightherapies.com, and reach out to you directly, email, text, call, all of those, correct?
Lots of ways. Yep.
Yeah, lots of ways. All right. Sounds good. Well, thanks again. And we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Lori. Okay.
All right.
Good.
Take care. Bye.
You too.